Hey everyone, Token Dave over here, the dorky token black guy that's just trying to get by. And welcome to the first episode of the Garou Densetsu Flashback. In celebration of the 25-year plus anniversary of this franchise, I'm taking it upon myself to share my thoughts of playing the games in the arcade and on home console at that period of time, and as well as share my thoughts and feelings on the other Garou Densetsu, media. Predominantly the animes, we'll get into sometime. So, back in the early 90s, fighting games were the craze thanks to Street Fighter 2 coming out and basically, wowing the mainstream audience. Street Fighter actually became a household name. But there are other clones that came out. Other fighting games that came out at the time, and I was searching for one that I liked, that I could find that I could like more than Street Fighter, and I found this in Garou Densetsu. Now, before I go in, let me state that I have a very interesting memory of playing these games because I did not play all these games when they came out. In fact, I actually only played 3 games when they came out. Most of the games I played a little bit later, maybe about a year or 2 later and everything. But in any case, basically, this Garou Densetsu is actually my favorite fighting game franchise. Why? Primarily because it did a couple of things that all the other fighting games didn't do. One, it actually gave us a plot and everything. This was the first fighting game that had an established plot. Something that other fighting games would definitely do in the future, right? Number 2, this was the fighting game that actually introduced people into different forms of martial arts. So, most fighting games, at the time, they really concentrated more on karate, kung fu, and, some sort of wrestling style. Karate, kung fu, wrestling style, ninjutsu, and everything, right? Garou Densetsu actually did something very interesting. It gave us styles that most people that were not really popular or really not as well known at the moment. And to top it off, number 3, it actually gave us a protagonist and a setting set in the United States as opposed to something set somewhere in Asia or anything, right? So this was actually a fairly interesting, direction for a fighting game compared to most of the other ones that came out. Now, so since this is a flashback, let's talk about the first game in the series, Garou Densetsu. Alright? So, I am not gonna lie, I did not play this game in the arcades. I actually only played, the first time I played this was on Super Nintendo. And I was not impressed, to be honest with you. The Super Nintendo, the graphics looked terrible. The control was awful. The sound effects were terrible. So, what did I like about this game? Well, let me start off with the fact that it had a plot. Again, what is the plot to Garou Densetsu? Well, the plot is basically about Southtown, a fictional American city that is highly corrupt, and basically, basically the rich or the powerful are all the way to the top, while everyone else is part of the poor, and they're struggling to make ends meet. In this, basically, the person on top who controls everything in Southtown is an underground crime boss named Geese Howard, and Geese actually fashions himself as basically, a high-profile businessman that's very respectable in the community. However, this high profile is a facade that everyone that lives in Southtown knows about, but unfortunately with Geese's connections, they can't prove his corruption. In fact, Geese is actually, Geese himself was the police commissioner up until he retired, and he created his own company called the Howard Connection, in which he is basically like a security company and everything. But it's a load of crock, and everyone knows it, but no one can prove it because Geese has the police in his pocket, and he is actually in charge of everything in the criminal underworld of Southtown. However, before Geese was able to fully incorporate all of this, he had one problem. A fellow student that practiced martial arts with him named Jeff Bogart. He was the only person that was able to stand up to Geese and actually challenge Geese to beat him. One day, Geese actually was able to murder Jeff Bogart in combat. Well, depending on how you look at it. Regardless, Jeff was killed by Geese. And this death was witnessed by Jeff's adopted sons, Terry and Andy Bogart. Since these two were very young at the time, and with Geese's connections, they could not prove that he killed their father. So their only choice was to basically go on a 10-year training trip to basically train in martial arts for 4 years, and then basically after the 10-year training period, they would come back to Southtown and try to get revenge on Geese. However, with his connections, the only way they could actually get a chance to defeat Geese is by partaking in the annual tournament known as the King of Fighters that Geese always holds every year for his own purposes, which I will get to pretty soon. I will not lie to you guys. The initial game is not impressive. You know how everyone complains about the original Street Fighter game? The original Garou Densetsu is pretty much like the original Street Fighter game. The only difference is basically, one, you are actually able to fight on 2 different planes, something very innovative and kind of tricky to do. Number 2, a lot of the characters actually, number 2 is you're able to play more characters, whereas as opposed to you're only able to choose Ryu and Ken, you could choose 3 characters, Terry, Andy, and Joe, right? Terry is actually the lead character, the lead protagonist of the whole series, and he is not your traditional martial artist. He is the original mixed martial artist. He knows, in the game, it's clear that he knows boxing, kickboxing, he could possibly know karate and everything, or some other martial art, but we cannot tell and everything. However, he is the one who ends up defeating Geese in this game. Actually, when you play the game and everything, when you get to Geese, when Geese is finally defeated, they do this really cheap animation where someone does a jump kick and Geese falls off the top of his building and falls to his death and everything. However, with this game, like I said, it's not that impressive graphically, but it gave us a different take on fighting games. It actually took place in a city, in a corrupt city, number 1. Number 2, it gave us new martial arts. Geese Howard is predominantly an Aikido practitioner, where Andy, we find out, is actually a practitioner of Hopoken, which is a type of karate, but it focuses more on the bones, breaking the bones or shattering the bones and everything. We find this out a little bit later because in this game, they state that he's a karate stylist. Joe Higashi is a Muay Thai stylist, which is nothing new. This game introduces us actually to Capoeira. This is the first time Capoeira is introduced into a fighting game, and we have the character Richard Meyer to thank for that, because Richard Meyer is actually one of the most underrated characters that, while if you're a fan of the Garou Densetsu or SNK, you actually know of him and you actually like him a lot, The game also, has a creative way of, if you ever watch Power Rangers, there's the character Zack, who does something called hip-hop keto and everything, which mixing dance with martial arts. We get this in SNK staple named Duck King. Duck King is one of the most popular characters that was not selectable at the time to have come out and has appeared in other games and within this series. I also want to point out that there are 2 antagonists that are here that SNK characters do know, but SNK followers know, but they're fairly underserved. And that is basically Huajai and Raiden. Now, Raiden I will get into in the next video when I start talking about Garou Densetsu. But Huajai is really, really underrated and doesn't get enough props. We see him throughout the series, both in game and in OVAs and everything. And it's a shame that, characters like Huajai and Richard Meyer are really wasted and everything. It would be nice to see them as selectable characters again in an upcoming game sometime, but I know that's not going to happen and everything because it's been years and it hasn't happened yet. But guys, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. As much as I love this series, the first game, the initial game, is a really bad start. While it has some interesting concepts, it actually expanded martial arts at the time because most people only focused on very little styles and everything. And they didn't have, and to top it off, while it was creative in making everything take place in America and having a non-Asian as the main character, the game was really not that impressive and everything. But the good news is that basically with this rough entry, the series only got better in time. So, do you guys agree? Do you guys disagree? Do you guys have any memories of playing the original Garou Densetsu game? Drop me a comment below, give me a like, follow me at Token Dave on Facebook, and at Token Dave 80 on Twitter. Subscribe and ring that bell so you know when a new video loads. But until then, this has been Token Dave, Dorky Token Black Guy who's just trying to get by, and I'll catch you guys later.